seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay up. Oh my God! 30, 10, touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! Ah! What a miracle finish!
Hey everybody, welcome to Wednesday and welcome to the State of Purple. It's the State of Purple podcast. I'm Aj Mansour. He's Jack Day. Today, Jack, we finally get an opportunity, sidetracked with general manager news and head coaching news. We finally get an opportunity to tie a bow on the 2021 season. And apparently my 3-year-old wants to join in. I got him all the snacks that I could possibly get him. I got him panda cookies. I got him goldfish crackers. And we go live, and he immediately starts yelling. So he'll be joining us today. Jack, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to, like you said, tie a bow on the season, although it kind of feels like I think most Vikings fans probably did that probably a couple months back already, which is kind of unfortunate. But looking forward to officially tying that bow on the season, kind of recapping some things, and then moving forward, talking about some of the GM candidates, head coaching candidates. And then before you know it, we'll be talking about the draft. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's a reminder that though we would all wish to be in the postseason right now, the offseason is kind of fun when there's a lot of speculation to be had. And it doesn't get any more speculative than when you have a head coaching job, a general manager job, and then the draft, and then free agency, and all that to fill along the way. For the Minnesota Vikings, that's the case. So we didn't get a chance to talk about the season last week because we were talking about Mike Zimmer, Rick Spielman. That story has progressed a little bit too, Jack. I don't know how much you've seen of that. Obviously, we've heard some interesting things about Mike Zimmer and some meetings that he was calling towards the end of the season that were kind of scapegoating the whole situation, pointing blame to other situations or other people. And then was it yesterday, a podcast dropped with Rick Spielman, sharing some nuggets about what that relationship was like between Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman. Have you seen all these things yet, Jack?
Yeah, I've seen a little bit. I mean, it's always crazy. And I kind of figured we would get to this point where once something leaks, whether that was something as small as what Eric Kendrick said a few weeks ago, right, it just kind of spirals or snowballs, if you will, from that point. And obviously, I think I speak for everyone in the state of Minnesota that things aren't going to work out properly if the GM and the head coach aren't talking to each other. And I think you kind of see that with Mark Wilf's press conference where he's talking about continuity and wanting the GM and the head coach to work together, because clearly there were a lot more issues in that front office than I think you and I both realized a couple months ago.
I think that's what you call collaboration. And I think that we heard Mike Wilf say that quite a bit in that press conference. So, yes, some interesting nuggets there. You can read about those situations at KFan.com. We'll cover it on Twitter as well as that continues to develop. Jack, we can't continue the conversation. We're going to tie a bow on the season. We're going to talk about the review of positions, the review of sides of the football, where the season went wrong, what they need to do to fix it. We'll get to some of that. But real quick, let's touch on those head coaching and GM candidates as the interviews are ongoing. Where we've seen some names that are linked to the team as far as requested interviews. There was one added today, Jack, that I know had you intrigued a little bit, and Raheem Morris, defensive coordinator for the Rams, now has a requested interview. I don't think it's happened yet, right? I think it's just we had news of a requested interview. Tell me why that one intrigues you.
Yeah, it's intriguing because although he is a defensive coordinator, you go back and he's spent some time on both sides of the ball. I think I have a couple names written down here that he has worked with when he had some time in Washington. Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur, and Sean McVay, all three head coaches in the NFL doing wonders right now. All three of them have already advanced to the divisional round of the playoffs. So I think that was the group of guys, including Raheem Morris, where they would get together and just talk football. So this guy's football IQ, it has to be off the charts almost. If you're around a group like that, it's exciting. And then you see there's tweets circulating, Jalen Ramsey talking him up. I think it was Rappaport came out and tweeted and said, it's about time this guy's getting a head coaching offer, not an offer, but an interview. And Jalen Ramsey essentially seconded that and had a couple of tweets talking about that. there's another nugget that I saw on Twitter. I think it was Tyler Fornes posted something, a screenshot from an article talking about D'Angelo Hall during his time in Washington. How he was kind of a veteran, but he was more of a, I don't know if head case is the right word, if you will, but he had a presence already in that locker room that was felt, and he came in and kind of worked with D'Angelo Hall and was able to work with him and be kind of a player's coach. There's another quote in that same select screenshots where it just said he's loved by all. I think it kind of hits all of the bullet points for what the Vikings are looking for. Obviously, I think first and foremost, you have to get that GM hired first, and then he's going to have some input. But I'm hoping down the road they can get to that point, and potentially when they get Morris in here, hopefully they have a GM already and they can kind of work together on that process. But he's definitely a head coaching candidate that is intriguing because, like I said, he hits all the bullet points. He has the offensive mind, he has the defensive mind, and he's loved by his players. And right now, I think that's kind of what's needed here in Minnesota.
Yeah, and he's kind of in that middle ground, right, as far as age goes. He's 45 years old, so he's on the younger side. I mean, when it comes to coaches in the NFL, but he's not your 32-year-old candidate. He's not your 34-year-old candidate. I think that has become popular, I guess, in the last couple of years with guys like Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, LaFleur getting these opportunities to come in and be super young head coaches. Kellen Moore, how old is Kellen Moore? He's super young.
He's 33 or 34 or something like that.
32. I'm going to look it up real quick just so you can, because we care about accuracy. Kellen Moore age, he's 33. You're right, 33 years old. That's super young. Obviously, that's one of the other candidates that they're talking to. A lot of people jumped off that bandwagon after that Dallas Cowboys game. I did make a post today about maybe why we shouldn't do that. You can check that out on my Twitter. But 45 years old for Raheem Morris. Been there, done that. Like, he has more experience than some of these guys. He's had opportunities to go through ups and go through downs and fight adversity and find a way to get through. Like you mentioned, both sides of the football, that's a good thing. You talk about the players coach, but he's going to hold them accountable. He has all those boxes that you could want for a stern coach, for a player coach, all of it. He's kind of in the middle, and it's a really good situation. So a really intriguing name that kind of came into this fold late. Jack, we won't waste too much time as far as the general manager candidates. They have started those interviews. They are sticking to their guns that they're going to hire a general manager first and then hire the head coach. But at the same time, those coaching interviews have started already because some of them they had to get a hold of before the bye week was over. Nathaniel Hackett out of Green Bay was one of those. You have those opportunities there that you have to take advantage of because you don't know when the next time you're going to get to talk to him is going to be. So they've started all these interviews. We're in a holding pattern. All we're hearing now is the names that they're going to interview, and we're all picking and choosing our favorite and hitching our wagons to it. One interesting one, Jack, that I will close on this maybe, that we haven't heard anything about outside of rumors and outside of maybe mutual interest, is Doug Peterson. Does that surprise you? He's not tied to anybody. He doesn't have to wait for the playoffs to finish up, and we haven't heard him tied to the Minnesota Vikings or haven't seen them request an interview. I guess they don't have to request an interview with Doug Peterson because who you're going to request it with, right?
Yeah, I was having that conversation with my dad, actually, and he's like, yeah, I've seen people kind of freaking out over this, and he doesn't have to be requested because he's not currently coaching. So he is an intriguing name. I think he has more cojones than some of the coaches that we've had here in the past. I mean, the Philly special rings a bell. Calling a play like that in the Super Bowl, that was impressive. But I'm not fully sold on Doug Peterson. Maybe that just is the anti-Philly-ness in me, and I just don't want to bring that into Minnesota. A couple other names that I think are worth monitoring. A lot of these guys, including Morris, who we just talked about, they're progressing throughout the playoffs. There's a couple guys, obviously Eric Bieniemy has ties to Minnesota, still coaching for the Chiefs in the playoffs, and that's going to be a fun game worth monitoring because they play the Buffalo Bills with Brian Daboll, who's a name that I'm kind of surprised that we haven't seen on the Vikings list because what he was able to do, the transition that he had with Josh Allen, watching him pick apart New England last weekend, I think that's another name that Vikings fans should at least monitor. I don't know if they're going to bring him in for an interview or not, but if I were the Minnesota Vikings, I would try to get as many candidates in that door as possible, and he would certainly be on my list.
Right, and he may not be able to be on the list yet, right? I mean, he's actively coaching, clearly. You can't get an interview with him when he's preparing for the game. The only ones we have are some of the teams that are out of the playoffs and some of the opportunities for coaches that had buys this last week. You have those sorts of situations that are popping up now too. So we'll see. Again, some of the names we've heard and they've requested that doesn't mean that they're interviewing them now, right? Because like Raheem Morris, they're still in the playoffs, right? They're still going. So they have an official formal request in. That doesn't mean that they're going to interview him anytime soon, maybe until LA's out. I don't know how that works. If I was the coach of the LA Rams or the owner or whoever is the one who signs off on these approvals, I would say, after we're out of the playoffs, sure, but once we're done, because I don't want him focusing on interviewing for a job when he's supposed to be preparing for, a tough playoff game coming up. Jack, we got 8 to 10 more minutes here. Let's talk about the 2021 season. Clearly a disappointing season for the Minnesota Vikings, who had some high hopes at the beginning of the year. And the wheels fell off pretty quickly as far as losing games they didn't think that they should lose. You look back now at that Cincinnati game to open up the season. Everybody's loving the Bengals right now. They won their first playoff game in 30 some years. They're not the bad team that we thought maybe that they were. But there was a bunch of stinker games, a bunch of clunkers, a bunch of games where they didn't come to play and maybe still won. Your general overall feeling on the way that the 2021 season went?
It was a roller coaster. I feel like I said that in every single article that I've written and probably every single show that we've done. But the highs were high and the lows were low. And I think that's really the best way that you can put it. And there was just never – we've preached this several times on the show. There was never continuity on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. It was either – that might be the wrong word that I just used there, but there was never – the offense would perform well when the defense wasn't performing and vice versa. And that's what it's felt like the case has been like since Kirk Cousins arrived in Minnesota. I know I was out in LA when I think that would have been his first year in 2018 when it was that back and forth battle. I think the Vikings ended up losing 38-31. Kirk Cousins played phenomenal football, but the defense just could not get the job done. And then whenever Kirk Cousins has his down games, it felt like the defense was getting 3-4 turnovers and kind of making an impact on the game. It never lined up and it was super frustrating. And I think obviously it turned into it hit the boiling point with both Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman. I don't know when that relationship went off the tracks, but it'd be interesting to see if that comes out now with these podcasts starting to spring a little bit. And if someone were to get a hold of Mike Zimmer, they could kind of talk about that. But obviously when your GM and your head coach kind of clash like that and they stop communicating, I would imagine that's felt from a player's standpoint as well. And it was too ugly. The Wilfs obviously sensed that. I think you and I were both a little bit surprised when the Rick Spielman firing came out before the Mike Zimmer firing. But at the end of the day, they had 4 years to do what I think the goal in 2018 when Kirk Cousins came through that door was Super Bowl or bust. And then they didn't make the playoffs that first year. I think then they go to 2019. They have that game against the Saints. And that game, honestly, probably helped with the Kirk Cousins extension, helped keep both Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman. If they would have lost that game, we could have been having this conversation a couple years back. Right. But at the end of the day, we're having it now in 2021. And I think although the season was a huge letdown, I think it's an extremely exciting time to be a fan of the Minnesota Vikings because there is so much unknown up ahead. And I think Vikings fans need to embrace that.
I forgot to do it earlier, so this is a good opportunity to remind everyone who's watching this live stream that we are live streaming, and this is an interactive chat. So if you have a question like Tony Peace has, throw it in the chat, and we'll talk about it on the show. Tony wants to know, Jack, do they have any interview candidates that are internal or a current coach that's worth interviewing for that coach opening? I don't think that there's any candidates worth interviewing right now, right? I think Andre Patterson might be the only one, and he's not getting any other looks as a head coach. So
you're telling me that Clint Kubiak doesn't have a chance at becoming the head coach?
That's interesting, right? He's kind of already fishing for new jobs, and he's not even officially fired here yet. That's an interesting thing there. So yeah, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to throw them into the comment string. We'll throw them up on the screen, give you some airtime, and maybe answer your question as well. Jack, the offensive side of the football starts and stops with Kirk Cousins. Always going to be a lightning rod for talkability and opinions, and you love him, you hate him, you're this side or you're that side. Generally speaking, were you disappointed with Kirk Cousins' season or not?
I don't think I would say disappointed. And again, this goes back to exactly what I said the last time I was talking, but it felt like a roller coaster. Gosh, that comment. It felt like a roller coaster season for Kirk Cousins as well, because he had some really good games, and you start to see, I think there was some improvements in his game, like within the pocket. He started to utilize his mobility a little bit more. But then that San Fran game hit, and it just kind of seemed like a downward spiral, and he couldn't kind of find his groove. And then, hey, in the most Minnesota way fashion possible, he finds that groove at the end of the season, and probably the most meaningless game that we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years here. So I don't think you can really put all the blame or the majority of the blame. I know that we've been labeled now as part of the decapitating hyena pack, but I don't think you can put all that on Kirk Cousins' shoulders. I think he played very well at times, and then there were a couple of games where he kind of took a step backwards. But I think you and I agree. I read your article that you had up on Vikings territory. Was that? I think it was this week. But I think this is a good situation for a GM and head coach to come into and have Kirk Cousins here. Whether one, they want to extend him and tie their name to Kirk Cousins, a 34-year-old quarterback. I don't personally think a GM and head coach want to do that. Two, if they just want to ride out and bite the bullet of that $45 million contract this year and then it readdress next year. Or three, which I think, in my opinion, is what I want to happen. They try to trade Kirk Cousins, potentially get a first-round pick back in return, maybe take one this year in the first round, maybe second round, and kind of address that position. I know the quarterback class isn't super strong in 2022, and then maybe bring in like a bridge-type quarterback and really focus by utilizing that money on the defensive side of the football, because we've talked about that. We'll get into this in a little bit. That defensive side of the ball scares the living crap out of me going into 2022. And I think it could get ugly before it gets better.
Yeah, no doubt. Lots to improve there. Jack, Kirk Cousins, if I had to guess, and I don't have the numbers in front of me and I didn't get this data, maybe we'll do that this week and post an article about it even. I feel like Kirk hits a point in the season every year where he plateaus, or he gets tired, or he gets injured, not like a season ending or a sit out of the game injury, but banged up. I just feel like there's always these months of October, like, right? It was the Kirktober last year where he had like the best 5-game stretch in a long time, like not even just in this organization, but he was a player of the month, offensive player of the month last year. And then he just hits these points in the season where either he's mentally not, able to carry the same approach to the game that he had, or maybe he's a little hurt, or maybe the offensive line gets hurt and that structure that he was comfortable with is now shaken. There just seems to be something where he gets to a certain point in the season each year where one wheel falls off. Maybe not all the wheels, but one wheel falls off, and it just loses the luster that maybe he had. And I don't know if there's anything to that. That's a feel. It's a hunch. I feel like that was what happened last year. I feel like that's what happened this year. We talk about him as MVP, and then right after that, he starts laying eggs and plays some stinker games. So I don't know what goes into it, but it feels like there is a situation there. When it goes to Justin Jefferson, I think everybody was super pleased with Justin Jefferson, pleasantly surprised that he could continue his sophomore campaign just as hot as his rookie season last year. I saw some tweets this morning that he's now the most targeted player since they started tracking targets for the tight ends and wide receivers in the history of the NFL through the first 2 seasons, 292 targets, I think it was. This is a crazy number there, gigantic impact for this team. He's a cornerstone for this team now, right? This is no longer he was a nice surprise. He was a splash. He is a cornerstone for this offense going into next season. Does that become a problem at some point? When contracts or egos or whatever.
I think we're forced to talk about that here in Minnesota because there is truth to all rumors, as I'm sure everyone remembers. But right. I don't think it's a problem yet. I'm not going to necessarily rule that out. And I want to go back and tie 2 things together with Kirk Cousins super quickly as well. One of my favorite things, this also I think stemmed from the Tyler Forness tweet of Morris this morning. One of his quotes that spoke out to me, all it was stats are for losers. And at the end of the day, going back to what you were just saying about Kirk Cousins, it always does feel like he has these stretches of games where it's a huge step backwards from what we're used to seeing. Last year, I think it was to open up the season. He started the season, the first 4 or 5 games. That Atlanta game last year was atrocious. And then, like you said, in October, he heats up. And then he gets, at the end of the year, he's looking forward. I don't know if you remember seeing this. There was someone asked him if he thought that his season was successful. I don't remember where I even saw this, but he said, talk to me after January 9th, after that Bears game. And that frustrated me as a follower of this team, because why is that your end goal, to have the media asking you, hey, come talk to me after January 9th, that Bears game when the Vikings aren't in the playoffs? Who cares what your stats look like? At the end of the day, the Vikings didn't make the playoffs. The product that you put on the field was pretty good, but at the end of the day, it wasn't good enough. The defense was atrocious. So that, I just wanted to bring that up too, because that was something that spoke to me when I saw the quote from him. But yeah, I think Justin Jefferson, he is going to be the main focal point of this offense. I know Dalvin Cook is a very, very good running back, but Justin Jefferson, you have Adam Thielen, probably, I feel like we say this every year, but Adam Thielen is getting to that point in his career where you'd think steps backwards are coming. Good news, I think this is probably the best I've felt about the Vikings wide receiver room in quite some time, with KJ Osborne emerging. You see Amir Smith-Marset against Chicago kind of coming to his own a little bit. And then you have guys like BC Johnson coming back next year, where that depth is actually going to feel pretty good. And then they could address it throughout the draft as well if they wanted to.
Poor time management on my side, but we got a couple of minutes left here. I do want to talk about the defense. You sound pretty worried about the defense, and I think that there's reason to be worried about the defense. Tell me specifically, is it the play? Is it so many free agents? Is it what is the plan now that we don't have our defensive-minded head coach, or is it all of the above?
Yes, I was just going to answer that with yes, because I think starting, and we didn't even have this on the list of positions to go through, but the D-line, you're going to lose production if Everson Griffin doesn't return. The Danielle Hunter, I know Danielle Hunter is on contract for 2022, but what's the future look like with his contract? Right. Because if he isn't in Minnesota, where are you getting this pass rush from? I believe both Delvin Tomlinson and Michael Pierce are under contract through next year. But then you get to the cornerback position, and right now, if the Minnesota Vikings were to step onto the football field, it would be Chris Boyd and Cameron Dancer starting, with Harrison Smith and Cam Bynum, and absolutely no depth behind those four. That is terrifying. And then you take that one step further, you bump down to the linebacking core. Eric Kendricks, I think, is it. That's played meaningful football this year. I know, like Blake Lynch, I guess he played some meaningful football. I think he's on the roster, but I don't think Nick Vigil is on the roster. I'm positive Anthony Barr is not on the roster, and that's something that I feel like Vikings fans aren't talking about enough. Eric Kendricks kind of got a little bit sappy when he was asked about Anthony Barr, and rightfully so. They've been playing football together for years. But the loss of a guy like Anthony Barr would be huge to this football team. I think he was playing some very, very good football at the end of the year, which unfortunately he couldn't play at the beginning of the year when he was hurt and banged up a little bit. But I think the loss of Anthony Barr, a guy like Nick Vigil, there's going to be a lot of people gone. And on top of it, there could be a whole new scheme coming in the door with the loss of Mike Zimmer. So there's a lot of shakeup on that defensive side of the ball. And I think, moving forward, looking ahead at 2022, a lot of the pieces remain for the new head coach and GM on that offensive side of the ball. But they're going to have to find a way to, one, get some starting tier talent on that defense, and then booster the depth of that defense as well. Because we saw it this year, there wasn't enough depth there, and that absolutely killed the Vikings down the stretch.
Yeah, if there's any consistent thing that you'll hear us say about the Minnesota Vikings for next season, is it's going to be different. Despite Kirk Cousins, despite Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, whoever you want to say that's returning, it's going to be different. There's going to be different schemes on offense and defense, and we don't know what it's going to look like, right? We don't know how much the head coach is going to be involved. We don't know how much or what style the offensive coordinator is going to bring to the table. Will it hurt Kirk? Will it help Kirk? Will it hurt or help Dalvin or Justin? Or what's this defense going to look like? This defense, as much of a shell of its former self as it was, they were formed around Mike Zimmer's scheme. Can Eric Kendricks play in a different scheme? Can Harrison Smith? We don't know these things because they've basically spent their entire career under Mike Zimmer, for sure the last 8 years. So you have those questions and those concerns there. Jack, I have a meeting that I'm late for, so we're going to have to cut this thing short. Again, I apologize. We're going to talk about all these free agents. I know there's some questions. Compton wants to know about Patrick Peterson. We have the opportunity and the suggestion to trade Dalvin Cook. These are all things we're going to talk about throughout the offseason. We'll do some free agent focus. We'll do some trade focus. We'll do some draft focus coming up on the State of Purple podcast. Maybe next week we'll have a general manager and maybe a coach to announce or to discuss or to kind of look at what that means. But we have a long offseason with lots of speculation, Jack. And I know that the draft is one of your favorite things. You pay close attention to college football and the prospects that are coming up through the ranks. So we'll lean on your expertise when it comes to that. And we'll do a lot of speculating, a lot of wishing, and a lot of hoping. And we will reconstruct this fantasy football team in real life with the Minnesota Vikings. But we'll have to start it next week because I'm going to get in trouble if I don't go on this conference call. So this is the State of Purple podcast. You can find old episodes on iHeartRadio, iTunes, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can follow Jack Day on Twitter, Jack_H_Day. You can follow me at AJKFAN, and you can find all our work at KFAN.com and on our social media channels. Until next week, for the State of Purple podcast, for Jack Day, I'm Aj Mansour. See you later.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay up.